Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. We now welcome Dr. Gail Christopher, a nationally recognized leader in health policy, to get her thoughts on racial healing through policy. Welcome, Dr. Christopher.
It's wonderful to be here.
So this year's meeting theme is focused on social connectedness. Can you speak to the importance of racial healing for improving social connectedness?
You know, we are, as a country, deeply divided along racial lines. We have institutionalized segregation. And when we no longer made it a government practice, we still didn't address the legacy of it. And so we are separated and segregated. And one of the ways that we must overcome racism in this country is by building connections across racial lines and learning how to see ourselves in the face of the perceived other. And that's what we mean by racial healing as an approach, as a methodology. But we also mean, creating those opportunities, creating those compassionate spaces where we bring diverse people together and we begin to feel or be reminded of our connectedness as a human family.
You've also pioneered the development and implementation of the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Framework. Can you describe that framework and how it can be used to promote racial healing and improve connectedness?
Thank you for that question. Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation is an American adaptation of the globally recognized truth and reconciliation process. But after we studied the more than 40 efforts that have happened around the world in terms of truth and reconciliation, we knew that this country, given its diversity and given its unique history, that this country had to revise the approach to reflect that we are a mature democracy. We had our major conflict back in the 1800s, but we never did the work to rebuild relationship and connectedness. And so Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation as a framework has 5, I like to call them buckets. I know that's a very scientific term, but and sometimes we call them pillars. But the first is narrative change. We have to create a new narrative and a new story of who we are as a country, how we became who we are, that includes the voices of the groups that have been traditionally marginalized. The second pillar is racial healing and relationship building. We really have to be intentional about building relationships that affirm our humanity and enable us to see each other, in the face of one another, rather than to continue to live in these silos of separation. And so the bottom 3 pillars of the framework are addressing the legacy of institutionalized separation and segregation and the disinvestment in communities based on that. So working to undo the legacy of legally imposed racism is part of the work, and that's one of the pillars. And then finally, it's the economy. We have to realize how our meteoric rise to become a world power, our economic prowess, if you will, was built on and immersed in racism and the hierarchy of human value.
Can you give us some examples of what racial healing looks like in practice? What are some things that communities around the country are doing or can do if they want to promote racial healing and racial equity?
Oh, I was just on a call with a philanthropic network in Ohio, and they have trained a cadre of facilitators of racial healing circles. And so they are opening up this opportunity to people in their communities to be part of these diverse circles of narrative sharing and really bridging divides. And they're amazed at the numbers of people who want to do it. In Chicago, they've worked with the community colleges, and they've equipped young people, especially, with the capacity to facilitate racial healing circles. And the state of Illinois has actually issued a call for proposals, a multi-million-dollar grant opportunity to spread the work around the state. That's for that particular methodology. But things like changing the monuments, changing the public spaces so that they are more inclusive, they're more reflective of a broader community. That all contributes to racial healing for sure.
And what advice would you give to public health professionals who are engaged in this work but encounter a lot of resistance that prevents them from making meaningful progress?
Well, resistance says that you're doing something. So you're always going to encounter resistance if you're trying to make systematic or systemic change. So I would say don't be disheartened by resistance, but rather be inspired by it and know that you have to figure out how to work around the resistance and to keep doing what you're doing. But we have pulled together a wonderful set of briefs that are based on the framework, where we give examples of what communities are doing across this country. And I think in addition to the declarations, and this is really a wonderful time, that over 200 jurisdictions have declared that racism is a public health crisis, but we also show the systemic changes that people are putting in place to not only, address it as a public health crisis, but to bring the social determinants of health into that strategy. So I encourage you to visit the website of APHA, the De Beaumont Foundation, the National Collaborative for Health Equity, and look at the Healing Through Policy briefs that will give you some examples of evidence-based, not only policies, but also practices that you can put in place. But I would also say that we've never had a moment like this in our history. We've never had 20 million people marching in the street calling for equity. We've never had over 200 jurisdictions declaring racism as a public health crisis, nor have we had the CDC step forward, as the current director of the CDC did in the last year, to declare racism as a public health crisis. So this is a moment where we almost have the wind at our back, the wind at our sails. And so don't be disheartened by resistance. Know that that's just an indication that you're making progress.
Thank you for your time and insights, Dr. Christopher. Enjoyed this year's meeting.
It's been a pleasure.